A tall figure emerged from behind Chandler. That jet black hair, the sharp jawline I'd traced countless times, those intense eyes that had pierced right through me. It was Evan. My Evan. My boss, Chandler, walked into my office that morning with a spring in his steps. He seemed particularly happy about something. I'd hoped it was not firing me. Chandler was a rolling ball of excitement. Almost anything got him animated. I looked up, smiling expectantly. "Max, my good man," Chandler hailed me. "There's someone I want you to meet." Chandler was one of those bosses who liked to be one of the people, although he was everyone's superior and well above us. He insisted on partaking in team activities, talking to us like friends, and oversharing his personal life. So I was not surprised when he said, "my boyfriend." Everyone knew Chandler changed boyfriends like others change clothes. Every time he met a new one, he was confident that this was his forever, until they left him and he spent an entire week barking orders at the team. Still, I had my expectant smile and waited for this boyfriend to reveal himself. Then, someone stepped up from behind Chandler, and it was Evan, my ex-boyfriend of 1 year. I could not believe it. The walls of my office faded into the background, Chandler with them, and it was just me and Evan, standing in open space, staring into each other's souls. I stood still, awestruck, barely hearing as Chandler droned on. "Evan, this is Max, my favorite employee of all time. Max, this is Evan, the light of my life." He laughed as he said it as if he had just made the funniest joke, and I just stared, stunned. "Nice to meet you." Evan's voice finally snapped me back into reality. I coughed loudly and sputtered as I tried to speak. You too." "Come on," perpetually jovial Chandler said. "Won't you shake hands?" And so I got out of my chair, legs feeling like lead, and walked across the room to where he stood with Evan. I held up my hand mechanically and took Evan's outstretched hand in mine. I felt electricity shoot through me as we made contact, and from the way Evan's eyes squinted, I knew he felt it as well. We pulled away instantly, and I returned to my chair while Chandler herded Max out. I had no idea how to process what I'd just seen. Evan had disappeared from my life for an entire year. Despite all my protests, now he was back and dating my boss. What a way to begin the week. Flashback. 1 year ago. "Max," Evan yelled from the living room, "I got the job." "What?" I shouted, rushing out. I ran into the living room where he showed me the mail from a company he had applied to. He recently graduated college and did not expect to get a job as a software engineer at such a huge company with no more than entry-level experience. I encouraged him to apply regardless, and now he got the job. He kept saying, "I can't believe this," but I knew him and I was confident in him. It was pretty believable for me. We danced around the house for a while to absolutely no music but still having fun. After we tired ourselves out, I headed to the store to pick up a bottle of wine and some cake for celebrations. Later that evening, we lay in bed together, my head on his chest. He stroked my hair. He enjoyed touching them, called them honey locks for their honey brown color. While I gushed on about how happy I was for him, we were quiet for a while, just enjoying the tranquility of being in each other's arms when Evan spoke. "You know what this means, right?" His voice had a sad quality to it. "That you get to earn a lot of money and I can live off you?" I joked. "No, silly," he chuckled. "That I have to move to another city." I sat up at his words. I wasn't aware that the job was in another city. How could that be? I asked to see the mail again, and Evan handed me his phone. There, in the middle of all those words, was the clause. There was no opening in our city, but they recently created a branch in another city, and if he didn't mind moving there, the job was his. I immediately started throwing out suggestions for how we could make it work. We could travel back and forth to see each other every month. We could schedule calls. It just didn't occur to me that breaking up was an option. We were like peas in a pod, made for each other, some might say. So intense was our love and affection for each other that I believed every other thing had to make way for it. To my dismay, none of these options were viable for Evan, and he had a simple reason. He could not deal with needing affection, especially physically, and his partner being out of reach. He insisted he didn't want to ever have a reason to cheat on me, and yet He could not deny that he was a physical person when it came to expressing and receiving love. I tried convincing him. I told him our love would endure, but he said he had to be realistic. I was devastated. I couldn't believe our 2-year-long relationship was going to end just like that. I could not wrap my head around the permanent absence of Evan from my life. Yet, I couldn't ask him to give up his dream job just to stay with me. What would I offer him in place of his dreams? It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, and I wanted nothing more than for him to take it. We cried hard that night, both trying to comfort each other and each failing miserably. We were inconsolable. It did not get better after that night. As Evan prepared to leave, we got into fights constantly. I couldn't shut out the voice in me that whispered that if he truly loved me, he would stay with me, even though I knew the truth. I wondered why he couldn't try being faithful to me from a distance before just deciding to just give us up. I knew the guilt ate at him as well. He probably thought he was being selfish for choosing his career. We tried to keep it together until one night when we both couldn't keep it in any longer. Harsh words were exchanged and character flaws were brought up. We ripped into each other brutally, and at the end of it, we were both shaking from the sheer force of emotions. I slipped to the floor when Evan walked out the door to go find a hotel, wondering how 2 years of bliss generated into so much pain. I guess we couldn't just let go without giving it a fight. Flashback. 2 years ago. The sound of the rain pattered against the window somehow made the evening perfect. Evan was over at my place for the 3rd time and we were cooking spaghetti for dinner. Since we met at a party, both the only ones seated in a corner, both finding the whole thing just incredibly boring, we had become practically inseparable. At the party, we discovered that we had both been forced there by friends who then abandoned us for drinks on the dance floor. The next day, Evan called me up and asked if I wanted to visit a gallery. Since then, it's been from concerts to movies to museums to football games. We hadn't put a name to it yet. We didn't even acknowledge that we were going on dates. We just went. I guess we didn't care for the formalities. We were just two people who liked each other and enjoyed each other's company. Eventually, I got up to ask him to my house to see The Great Gatsby together. He came and we had a swell time. He initiated the next visit, getting even more relaxed than the last time. Then I invited him again, and there he was, barefoot in my flat, cooking spaghetti while I poured wine into glasses on the counter. I took him a glass. He swirled the wine around in it and took a sip before setting it down. He beamed up at me like I'd just done something extraordinary, or like I was extraordinary. "I hate the rain, you know," Evan said. "But it's so beautiful when I'm with you. Everything is beautiful when I'm with you." He looked straight into my eyes as he said this, and I felt my heart swell at his words. He had a way of staring into my eyes and making me feel like I was the only thing that mattered in the world. As the rain pattered on, it got darker and darker. Instead of switching the lights on, I went for aromatic candles and lit them. I felt like there was a certain magic in the air that evening, and I was doing my part to bring it out. The spaghetti was ready now, and Evan dished it in my little star-shaped plates. I poured some wine for us, and we drank together, discussing work and school over dinner and wine. Soon, Evan's words began to slur. He said, laughing, "I think I might be getting drunk." "Yes, I think you might be," I said, and we both laughed together. "I love you, Max," Evan whispered. I looked up at those words, holding his eyes and finding the same longing in my heart and them. I pushed back the stool I sat on and got off it. I walked up to him on shaky feet and stood before him, just looking at him before taking his lips in mine and kissing him with so much passion I thought we could both burst into flames. Flashback. A year ago. I got back from work to find the living room deserted. Evan had moved in with me a while ago and we had a routine figured out. I got back from work every day to find him already back from his college classes. He sat in the same spot in the living room, on his computer working or studying. He came back even earlier these days since he was already writing his final exams. He wasn't in his usual spot today. I looked around and saw the door that led to the balcony was open, the blinds drawn. I walked in there and found him surrounded by stacks and stacks of papers, looking so disheveled and confused. I ran up to him immediately and asked what the matter was. He just shook his head and gestured around him. "I am exhausted, Max. How much longer do I have to do this? I took off my shoes and sat next to him on the ground. We had this conversation before. Evan enjoyed the practical aspects of his studies, but learning the theory and writing tests proved extremely challenging for him. I put my arm around his shoulder and pulled him into me. I said nothing, allowing him to turn over whatever thoughts filled his mind. I held him for a long time, listening to the sounds of his breath. He asked suddenly, "Would you still love me even if I dropped out?" I nodded yes. "But you've worked so hard for this. There's just one more test left." He got up and turned his back on me, staring out at the city. I stood next to him and watched the flow of traffic and the many night lights with him. "What do you think is out there, Max, waiting for me?" I smiled as I watched him. Evan had such big dreams, and it was very clear that a simple life like I enjoyed would never be enough for him. I was content to have my same analyst job, working in my small office, doing something simple but which I was passionate about. Evan, on the other hand, wanted to get into the big places, and I have concluded over the last year that my calling was to get him there. I constantly encouraged him towards them and pulled him up whenever he was demotivated, like in that moment. Evan suddenly turned around and stared into my eyes. Those eyes, ocean eyes, they drowned me. "Promise me you will stay with me forever, Max," he pleaded. "I promise," I said, and pulled him into my arms. We hugged each other tight, even as doubt filled my heart. Would I be able to follow Evan into the spotlight when it called for him, as I knew it would surely do? End of flashback. I couldn't believe it when Evan and I let each other go. It was as though all my secret fears had come back out to mock me. I always thought we were soulmates and nothing could ever come between us. Yet, there was that tiny voice of doubt that constantly whispered at the back of my head. When Evan left, I concluded it was right all along. Maybe I was just the kind of person who wasn't enough to make his soulmate stay. And now he was back, just like he never left, and surprise, surprise, a year had not been enough to get over him. The shock as I stared into his eyes, the electricity that coursed through me as I touched him. When did he even get back? What happened to his job? How was he dating again so soon? Did he love Chandler? Was it easy to get over me? Did his job make him happy? I felt like running after him and asking all these questions. I was in a lot of trouble, clearly, and the only way out of it was to avoid him as much as possible. That shouldn't be hard, seeing as we no longer share the same circles. The next day, weekend. I couldn't have been more wrong. I walked into the topmost floor of the office building, now converted into a cocktail party, and the first person I bumped into was none other than Evan on Chandler's arm. I was just settling down to an evening of The Big Bang Theory when a call came in from Chandler, his boisterous voice yelling in my ears. "My man Max, where are you?" "What?" I asked. "Are you coming to the party?" He shouted more, and I had to hold the phone away from my ear to keep my eardrums from rupturing. "You should be here." And just like that, I was on my way back to my workplace after a long day at said workplace to have a cocktail party in celebration of an obscure deal someone closed. Chandler probably just wanted an opportunity to party and show off his new boyfriend. Evan looked dashing in his perfectly cut dark blue suit, and his hair was styled differently. It brought out the color in his eyes and made him look younger, boyish. It was a struggle to get my eyes off him. The evening dragged on, filling me with much wariness. I hated these company parties. I wasn't really the partying guy, and I would have been better in my own house, seeing a series I enjoyed and gouging myself on snacks. Now I had no choice but to follow Evan and Chandler around with my eyes all night. I just couldn't tear my eyes away from them, Evan especially. I couldn't believe this was him, mingling and dancing and having fun. The same man whom I bonded with over our mutual dislike for parties. I looked up one more time and my eyes met Evan's directly. That single eye contact gave both of us away. He had been staring as much as I had been. Something passed between us in a single glance. So much pain and tenderness. I looked away, breaking the connection. I followed him with my eyes for another moment, and then he just disappeared from my sight. I suddenly was so exhausted, more exhausted than I had been in months. I picked up my jacket and waded my way through the bodies of coworkers and other people that I didn't know. Then I found myself outside, the cool wind swatting at my face and giving me respite from all the feelings that weighed me down. I started to leave, and then I heard my name whispered softly in that unmistakably beautiful voice. Max. I turned around to face Evan, and we stared at each other for long minutes. The silence was heavy, filled with all the things we couldn't put into words. For a moment, he looked like he had something to say. Then I see a shadow start to appear behind him. Perhaps another partygoer, perhaps his boyfriend, and I managed to curve my lips into a rueful smile. Good night, Evan, I said before turning away. 2 days later. For the past 2 days, the thought of the look shared between Evan and myself remained in my head. I kept wondering what it was he had to say, but I knew that shouldn't even be a thought in my mind. He was with my boss now, and going down that path just seemed like trouble to me. Thoughts about what he had to say only led to thoughts about our past relationship, which led to thoughts of longing for him. Still, I couldn't stop myself from wondering if Evan still wanted me. What was he doing with someone like Chandler anyway? I didn't think they had anything in common, at least not from what I knew about Evan. Still, what did it say about what I knew about him if we couldn't even work things out in the end? I breathed hard and took a bunch of files off my desk into Chandler's office. My head felt like such a mess since Evan had shown up at the office, and I just couldn't seem to clear it. No matter how much I tried to throw myself into work or watch show after show, I was just stuck reminiscing about the past. My mind was so occupied that I forgot to knock on Chandler's door before entering, a choice I regretted immediately. There they were, Chandler and Evan locked in a passionate embrace and kissing each other like their lives depended on it. It was a private moment, but I couldn't even make myself look away. Their bodies fitted into each other the same way Evan used to fit into me. There was a rapturous look on Evan's face, and when he opened his eyes, he looked dazed, the same look he used to get whenever we shared a kiss. Our eyes met, and I fled out the door, running back into my office and locking the door behind me. I stood with my back to the door, my head hammering, my heart hurting, and tears I didn't realize I still had in me falling. I had no idea that seeing Evan like that with another man would get me so much, but it did. I felt like I had gotten a punch in the gut, just seeing him that way, the look in his eyes, and the knowledge that he had actually moved on. It was too much for me to take. I guess I was the only one still stuck in the past, longing for times long gone. 5 days later. Another company party, another evening of watching Evan and Chandler being the happy couple. I wasn't in for any of that. Our company had done some research and market analysis for a charity organization, and for some reason, they wanted event after event. Being the project manager, I had no choice but to be there, even if I hated every minute of it. All through last week, as much as I now tried to avoid him, I caught Evan directing gazes at me. At first, I thought he wanted to confront me about the other day in Chandler's office. However, his gazes weren't as much questioning as lingering. I wondered why he looked at me the way when he was perfectly comfortable in Chandler's arms, kissing him. It was as though he was trying to confuse me when I found those ocean eyes of his, tracing my body. Tonight, I was not ready to deal with any of that. If I had to be at this party, then I had better get very drunk and send all thoughts of Chandler or Evan out of my mind. I downed glass after glass of cocktail, finding the music suddenly bearable. The conversations weren't even half bad, I thought, talking to a few coworkers. All of a sudden, I felt a wave of melancholy hit me, and I stumbled away to the balcony. I sat on the balcony floor, my back to the party and nursing another cocktail. I wondered what it would feel like to be one of those couples on the dance floor, or to be Chandler and Evan. What would it be like to be able to hold someone else, or to kiss someone else without thinking of the last person you were with? What would it be like to contemplate being with someone else without having this pain in my heart? I sighed deeply and took a swig from my glass again. Hey, I heard this voice behind me. I startled, looked around until my eyes alighted on him. I sighed again. Evan, I whispered. He whispered my name back. Max. He laughed and informed me he was drunk. I smiled back at him and told him I was drunk too. He got into a ramble, filling me in on all the information that I had been longing to ask but could not bring myself to. He told me about how hard the first few months away from me were. He found it hard to navigate a new life after leaving his soulmate behind. My eyes misted as he said this. He wanted to call me so many times, but he couldn't. He finally got used to being without me, but his career brought him back. He became a senior software developer and was transferred to the branch of the city because of his unique skill set. I beamed at him, very happy for how far his dream had taken him. I didn't have to say anything. I knew he understood what that smile meant when he smiled back and took my hand in his. It's as though we were back in the past, sitting on my balcony floor, staring out at the city. We were back there again, envisioning the future. Yet, I reminded myself gently that this was the present, and Evan was now someone else's boyfriend. I slipped my hand out of his and returned to the party. The next day. Evan was around once again, and today, not just as Chandler's boyfriend. Chandler needed his input on our current project, and unfortunately, I was in charge of that project. Chandler was also out of town, and that seemed to have loosened something in Evan. He followed me around with his eyes all day like a lost puppy. His gaze lingered on me in very uncomfortable ways, and at some point, I barely managed to keep myself from screaming at him. Worse yet was the fact that we had to meet with the client, all alone, for a presentation. As we prepared the files and documents for this, he increasingly found excuses to touch me. His hands constantly grazed mine, his touch lingering on my shoulders, and one time he bumped into me and didn't pull away soon enough. He shot me moony looks as I gave the presentation, doing something with his eyes I couldn't start to explain. I kept my cool through all the presentation by just taking so many deep breaths, but that only worked so long. The moment the presentation ended and we saw the clients off, I excused myself to the bathroom and splashed some cool water on my face. I just didn't understand. What was he doing? Why was he doing this? Evan was standing in the hallway when I stepped out of the bathroom. At that moment, I was sure he had come out there looking for me, and I wasn't ready to let that slide. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "What do you mean, what am I doing?" he laughed. "I'm going to the bathroom." I shook my head. I knew that laugh, and it was the one he gave when he was nervous. It was almost like he was confessing. "No, you're not. You've been looking at me all day, touching me. What's with you? What do you want? You're with Chandler now, so why are you trying to confuse me?" I asked question after question, not giving him time to wiggle out. He still gave me a long look and then sighed deeply. His following words couldn't have surprised me more. He admitted to still having feelings for me. He thought he had managed to get over them, but seeing me had rekindled everything. "I miss you so much, Max. I want you. And as much as I try, I can't stop these feelings," Evan confessed. I threw my hands down, frustrated as I responded. "You remember why we broke up, right? You didn't want to cheat on me. Well, I'm not going to be the guy you cheat with." 2 weeks later. It was the weekend, and I was home enjoying my own company. It was good to finally have a weekend not filled with work-related events. After the terse conversation with Evan in the hallway, I didn't see him in the office again, not even when Chandler returned. Against my better judgment, I wondered where he was and what he was up to. I also worried that things I'd said had hurt him, but I was just trying to be honest. I did not support cheating, not even when it seemed it would favor me. Besides, I knew that wasn't Evan either. He was probably just consumed by his feelings, and I didn't want him to do something he would regret. I wondered if he was thinking about me and hoped somewhere deep in my heart that he'd consider leaving Chandler for me. This thought only made me feel terrible. I shouldn't wish for something like that just for my own greed. As I sat down to my bowl of chips and a musical, the doorbell rang. I got up hesitantly, wondering who it could be. I wasn't expecting any friends. I lost most of them in the long period I spent pining for Evan and ignoring them. "Hi, it's me," Evan said from behind the door. I opened the door, surprised to see him. He smiled at me, the smile not quite reaching his eyes, and stepped in. I led him to the living room where we sat across from each other. "I came to see you," he said, voice slightly trembling. I think we need to talk." "All right," I said expectantly. He started by apologizing for ending our relationship. He'd soon realized over time that he had made a mistake. He would rather remain together and foregone physicality than have to lose me. But it was too late when he finally got around to figuring this out, and he was certain I would not accept him. He had spent the days since our conversation in the hallway thinking, and he decided his reason for being with Chandler was not enough. He realized the relationship was insincere, at least from his end. Since I left, he needed somebody to fill the void, and when he met Chandler, who cared for him and made him feel genuinely loved, he decided to give it a chance. Seeing me again had brought back all his feelings that he had hid away. His feelings for Chandler paled in comparison, and it would be unfair if he tried to force it. He had broken it off with Chandler, and he was now here to see if I was willing to try again with him. I couldn't explain the joy that filled me at that moment. I looked at him with so many emotions, which were reflected in his eyes. We both stood up at the same time and walked into each other's arms, holding on tight. Despite the passion that burned between us, Evan and I could not immediately jump back into dating. There was a lot that had gone wrong between us, a lot of hurt and distrust that had grown over the past year. We decided to take things slow, starting with getting to know each other all over again. Within days, the initial awkwardness faded and we returned to how we were, so attuned to each other. I learned about everything he did while away, and I filled him in on my own time. I was glad to know he hadn't seen anyone other than Chandler, the jealous lover that I was. Speaking of Chandler, I nursed some guilt about him. I dreaded the devastated look I would find on his face when I saw him at work again. But I shouldn't have worried so much because the next time I saw him, he introduced his new boyfriend, Ben, to me. Everything was far from perfect. A whole year apart was not just erased by confessions of love. We knew we had each other, though, and that was enough to get through things. The end. Do you think those who abandon us deserve a second chance? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force and stay wholesome.